Mr. Heath, you're recorded.
Good morning and welcome to San Juan County Council's Tuesday, July 28th, 2020 meeting. Those who need to join by phone, would like to join by phone, the number is 360-370-0599 and the password code to get in is 441250 #. Again, that's 360-370-0599. Passcode 441250 #. This meeting is streamed via our AV capture on the county website as well as on a YouTube channel. If you have any public comments throughout the day, please forward them to councilc@sanjuanco.com. We now begin our regular meeting. It is 9 o'clock. If I could call the order, we'd all rise for the pledge. Ingrid.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ingrid. We now will provide a brief Coast Salish acknowledgement. Let us acknowledge we reside on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people who have taken care of these islands since time immemorial. We have no excused absences. Is everyone okay with the agenda for today? Mike, did you want to add an executive session?
Please.
So Ingrid, if we could add an executive session.
Performance of an employee.
For performance of an employee. And we'll have that after the closed session. Is that all right, Council?
Yep.
Yep.
Or have them together, excuse me. Is there anything else on the agenda, changes or questions?
Yeah, do we have anything on the land bank stuff other than what's on the agenda?
I have not seen anything, although I think we've discussed this issue before in executive session.
Actually, no. I got copies of stuff this morning. There was a staff report from Lincoln for item number 5.
Where's that, Mike?
I'm just looking in my packet, Jamie. I can send it to you.
Okay.
Mr. Stevens, you should have received an email with all of those documents, but I'm happy to send them to you again, and they are in SharePoint.
So again, I think this is a parcel we've discussed before.
No, I understand that. I was just looking for the documents, that's all.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's fine.
Jamie, just send them to you.
Thank you.
Would it be helpful for council if on Fridays I forward emails asking to make sure everyone has materials?
No, that's the clerk's job.
Any other questions regarding the agenda we have today? Mr. Stevens, I apologize you did not have the material. We'll work harder to make sure you have it in the future.
Nope, no problem. I just wanted to ask before we got going, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else on the agenda that we need to add or modify?
Nope.
Mr. Stevens, are you aware that I sent out a new agenda yesterday with 2 additions in red?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the new agenda, but that's why I was looking for those documents.
All right. Excellent.
No.
So you guys had an opportunity to look at the minutes for July 20th and 21st?
Yes.
Yes.
Entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the July 20th, 2020 minutes for the San Juan County Council meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes for July 20th, 2020. Any comments, questions? Without seeing any, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the San Juan County Council meeting minutes for July 21st, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes for July 21st, 2020. Any comments or questions? Without seeing any, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much. There is one small item on the consent agenda. Have you both had an opportunity to consider?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the consent agenda for the San Juan County Council meeting of Tuesday, July 28th, 2020.
you second?
Yeah, I did.
My apologies. We have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda for Tuesday, July 28th, 2020. Any comments or questions?
Nope.
Seeing all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. All right, so we now, anything else before I move into public access? Okay, we have a few folks on the phone. Expand this. All right, so the way I'm going to work this, we have, I have 5 or 4 letters to summarize really quickly. I'm going to start with people on the phone. The first caller I have is, it says Friends of San Juan's 360-378-2319. If you'd like to comment, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and which island.
Sure, thank you. My name is Tina Whitman. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tina.
Okay, great. Tina Whitman, Science Director at Friends of the San Juans. I'm commenting today on proposed changes to the temporary barge landing section of the Shoreline Master Program. While the uses of these sites may not be permanent, the large number of sites concentrated along sensitive marine shorelines and the potential for relatively high intense use makes the management of temporary barge landings important to both human and natural communities. With nearly 100 sites spread across the county, impacts to neighboring property owners, as well as impacts to critical areas, including eelgrass, forage fish spawning habitats, and shorelines important for rearing juvenile salmon, must be adequately tracked and noticed. 75% of temporary barge landing sites are located in places with eelgrass. 18% are located at documented forage fish spawning sites. The marine shorelines of San Juan County provide important rearing habitat for outmigrating juvenile Chinook, the same salmon that as adults are essential prey for our critically endangered southern resident killer whales. The habitats that support marine food webs must be protected. Nearly 200 adjacent property owners may be directly affected, and many more neighbors are located in areas with barge landing activities. As we have seen with the recent 2020 authorization of temporary barge landing activities on Waldron that allowed 12 landings and the placement of metal ramps and plates across the beach substrate to remain in place for up to 4 months or 122 days at a time, these quote-unquote temporary uses may be quite intense or long-lasting. Barge landings must be subject to proper tracking and notice to support public participation and open government, as well as the evaluation and management of impacts. Please decline the draft language that further loosens review of barge landing sites and ensure that the county collects enough information on barge landings to inform its required cumulative impact analyses. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to mention, and Tina, we will be having a public hearing in this, so you can also provide additional comment there. But if I could ask anyone else who has public comment regarding the public hearing we have that's scheduled at 9:15, if you could hold that comment until that point. And Tina, I forgot to bring that up, so I apologize. If you will have time in the public hearing if you would like as well. Thank you. John
Okay.
Gomez, so I assume that you're just listening?
Correct. Good morning. Thank you.
Great. And then the next person I have is Laura Bullock. Lori Bullock?
I'm not going to do public comment. I'm the LSWDD presentation.
Oh, great. Thank you. Outlook in, I think it's Sarah Ferris, is that correct?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to listen. I had a great conversation with Brendan Cowan this last week about some of the changing rules, and he gave me a good piece of advice, which was to call in and say something positive. And so I've been really thinking about the information that has just come out from the EDC about the PPP money that we've received in the county, and I wanted to just give a huge thank you to all of the Orcas businesses that applied for those loans. I was quite frankly astonished by the range of $10 to $16 million that we received to support payroll in San Juan County. It's incredible, and those are individual lives that our businesses are supporting, and the estimate of 949 jobs, considering how small our permanent population is, it's really significant. So thank you to the EDC for making that information available and easily digestible for us. And thank you to Orcas businesses for all that you're doing right now. And I also want to say a special thank you to our Orcas Island representative, Rick Hughes. I don't always agree with you, but these are really hard times to govern. And I know personally you have been giving to this community in a big way, and I think that the other county council people as well, but I support you, I stand with you, and I really appreciate your service. I know that it's not easy. So thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Sarah.
it.
The next person I have is, it says Henry Wiggin, 971-717-1867. If you'd like public comment, please unmute. All right, I have another Henry Wiggin number that says 971-285-7035. Would you like to provide public comment? Okay, and the last wireless caller, it's 360-366-6186. Would you like to provide public access or public comment? All right, is there anyone else on the line who would like to provide public comment or public feedback at this point? Have public access. All right. I have 5 emails that I will summarize very quickly. The first one is from Michael Reardon. He says, let me read into the record the paragraph up from the summary of the Washington Department of Health Situation Report number 9, published Friday, July 17th. This was to all council. I think we have already read this. It's talking about the removing of phase. Under these circumstances, any vote not to withdraw the county's application to move to phase 3 is irresponsible. There's some conditions of reduction of access from phase 3, and that he has changed his mind. At one point he was supporting of restaurants being open, but now he wants them to, doesn't support it as much. Situation Irish states, it's a matter of utmost urgency. Please vote accordingly. All right, the state's already changed that, so not necessarily. The next item is July 23rd to all, I think it went to all council members regarding VR regulations from Toby Cooper, Orcas Island, from the Vacation Rental Work Group, encouraging council to move forward on, there's 8 bullet points here that we've all seen in the past, to move forward with some kind of a vacation rental resolution, and calling on me as chair to lead us in a better place. We are more willing to assist. So vacation rental permit changes. Next thing's from Julia Rapp, vacation, I'm not sure which island. Vacation rentals are ruining our community. The majority of owners are off-island investors. No more conversation, time for action. The next one is dated November 13th from Dean Fry to a letter to Linda Culler regarding a motion that happened in November for the Lopez plan, and what was the situation of his property that was commercial and now isn't. Could we consider this or clarify it? And Naomi Aldort from Orcas, basically vacation rentals, ending vacation homes by all off-islander investors and rewarding renting year-round to local workers. We love our rural beauty and quiet, and vacation rentals are really destroying it. It's time to move forward and take positive action. So that's all the public comment at this point. I see a few more people just jumped on. Is there any public comment or public access that anyone who's just joined? I have a Vet Pickrell, 858-756-4672. Do you have any public comment?
Not at this time.
Okay. William Potts.
No, just checking in to try to see what's going on.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's it. All right. So it is 9:14. In 15 seconds, we will move forward with our public hearing. I'm going to mute anyone who's on the line right now. All All right, it is 9:15. We are now going to open a public hearing with public testimony accepted. This is a joint public hearing with the Department of Ecology on the Shoreline Master Program periodic update. Public hearing on ordinances to update the Shoreline Master Program regulations, amending San Juan County Code 18.20.20, 18.20.140, 18.20.190, 18.50.20, 18.50.30, 18.50.40, 18.50.50, 18.50.450, 18.50.540, 18.50.550, 18.50.600, 18.80.110, and 15.12.30 for July 28th, 2020 at 9:15 with Eric Shook, Director of Community Planning, and Chad, and I apologize, I forgot your last name just a second ago.
Young.
Chad Young, sorry about that, thank you. Erica.
Hold on just a moment. Our Adam is going to be presenting the SMP work, and I don't see him on the line, so hold on just a moment.
My apology, and Adam Zach.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
And Adam, let me make sure I'm planner 3?
Yes.
Great, Adam Zach, planner 3. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning. Today we're holding a joint public hearing with the San Juan County Council and the Washington State Department of Ecology to hear testimony on proposed amendments to the Shoreline Master Program for the periodic update. As you mentioned, Chad Young, a senior planner with the Department of Ecology, is participating over the phone. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So the proposed ordinance amends San Juan County Code, the sections listed here on the screen, and that Mr. Hughes very effectively and efficiently read into the record. The proposed amendments are required to keep the SMP current with the changes in state law, other county plans and regulations, and address the local circumstances as needed. The county developed these amendments to comply with the state law, which requires all local governments to review their SMPs on a set 8-year schedule. The SMP periodic review checklist was used to review the SMP. This checklist summarizes the amendments to state law, rules, and applicable updated guidance adopted between 2007 and 2019 that may have triggered the need for local SMP amendments. 9 changes were needed to comply with the laws and rules that were adopted after the last SMP periodic review. The proposed changes to residential appurtenance regulations were in response to a local need, and the proposed changes codify our adopted policy for appurtenance structures and simplifies the previously adopted regulations. We'll get into the specific changes for that when we discuss Ordinance Section 8. The County Council identified 3 additional changes for local circumstances. The ordinance proposes amendments that clarify the regulations for institutional uses, specifically post offices, so that they match our commercial use regulations. These changes are in, another proposed amendment reduces the permitting time and expense for public pedestrian trails by making the DCD director the decision maker for these substantial development permits. And then finally, the changes in Section 1 and 7 clarify the regulations for existing non-conforming temporary barge landing sites. And the proposed amendments will make it so that a certificate of exemption is not required for existing non-conforming barge landing sites, provided they will operate in the same manner that they historically have. So next, we'll take a look at the proposed changes in each section of the ordinance. Section 1 amends the definitions for a temporary barge landing site. This amendment was recommended by Ecology to account for the changes made to the temporary barge landing site exemption in Section 7. Now the definition specifies that a temporary barge landing site must not include new development. The proposed changes will ensure that by exempting existing non-conforming barge landing sites from getting a certificate of exemption, the county will not inadvertently allow shoreline development. Later, we'll look at the permit flow chart for temporary barge landing sites that will highlight why this is an important change. Ordinance Section 2 amends the definition of normal residential appurtenance to clarify what types of development are allowed. The proposed amendments were locally initiated to codify the adopted DCD policy for normal residential appurtenances. The proposed definition is more specific. It removes other detached residential structures from the definition and addresses some of the issues that required that policy. As a result, other detached residential structures that are not listed in the definition are treated as any other residential development, not as appurtenant structures. This was recommended by Ecology. And then finally, we amended the definition to remove wind power from before generators. And that makes this incorporate all power generators, not just wind power. And that was recommended by the county council. So here we can see the changes to the definition for normal residential appurtenance. And then in Section 3, this amends the S definitions to update the definition for shoreline development to clarify that development does not include dismantling or removing structures if there is no other associated development or redevelopment. And then Section 4 amends the general provisions of the SMP to allow the Director of Community Development, rather than the hearing examiner, to make decisions on the shoreline substantial development permit applications for public pedestrian trails and residential accessory structures that do not meet an exemption threshold. Section 5 amends the general applicability to delete Section 2C and replace it with language from the Washington Administrative Code, clarifying that those federal lands lying within the exterior boundaries of federal lands and those federal lands leased to other persons which fall within the definition of shorelands shall be subject to the jurisdiction of the RCW. Areas and uses in those areas that are under exclusive federal jurisdiction as established through federal or state statutes are not subject to the jurisdiction of the RCW. Section 5 also proposes a new subsection E be added to the permitting exemptions for developments not required to obtain shoreline permits. Requirements to obtain a substantial development permit, conditional use permit, variance, letter of exemption, or other review to implement the Shoreline Management Act do not apply to remedial actions, boatyard improvements that meet national permit requirements, WSDOT facility maintenance and safety improvements, projects consistent with an environmental excellence program agreements, and then projects authorized through the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council process, which is a statewide process. Section 6 amends the exemptions for shoreline substantial development permit requirements. This section makes housekeeping edits to reference the proper code sections and updates the specific cost threshold for dock exemptions to match the current allowed exemption thresholds in the state law. The exemption threshold was increased to $22,500 for dock replacements and $11,200 for all docks in freshwater. Then other amendments in Section 6 would exempt habitat improvements that conform with state law. that are consistent with the SMP and retrofitting structures for ADA compliance from getting a shoreline substantial development permit. So it kind of streamlines that for specific projects. Section 7 amends 18.50.550 for normal residential appurtenances to provide the updated fair market value of $7,000 or $7,047 adopted statewide for the exemption, and that was updated in 2017. In subsection 2I, permit requirements for existing temporary barge landing sites are clarified. These do not require a certificate of exemption if the proposed use is consistent with the historic transport of cargo at the site and frequency of the historic use. As amended in section 1, temporary barge landing sites cannot include new development. This is the amendment that has really received the most public comments in this process. And most of the questions around the amendment are about how this would work for an application. So I put together a permit flow chart to kind of help clarify how this would work. So when an applicant would like to use a site to offload cargo, kind of the first question that we would ask is, does the site have an existing permit? And if there is an existing permit and the proposed use is consistent with what was permitted, as shown in that lighter blue box there, no further action is required. If there is not an existing permit or the proposed use is inconsistent with what was permitted, the next question is, will the proposal exceed 12 landings in 24 months? And will the proposal include any new development? If the application is proposing either more landings, development, or a combination of both, this would no longer be a temporary barge landing site, and it would be a permanent barge landing site, which would require a shoreline conditional use permit. If the proposal does not include any development or exceeds 12 landings in 24 months, the next question is, has the site been legally and historically used as a barge landing site? If the applicant can demonstrate both that the site has been used as a barge landing site in the past and that the use of the site was legally established, then it goes on to the next step there. If neither of those things can be demonstrated, a certificate of exemption is required for a new temporary barge landing site. And then finally, if the proposed temporary barge landing is consistent with the historic, legally established use of the site, no further action would be required under the proposed changes.
Adam?
Yeah.
Before you go forward, if I can ask questions on this?
Yes.
So I have two. So where is the list of historic use sites that would be available?
There isn't necessarily one list. So we know of some temporary barge landing sites that are in existence, but ultimately the applicant would need to demonstrate, the burden of proof is on the applicant to show that it's a legally existing non-conforming barge landing site. So they would have to demonstrate to DCD that the site that they're using has historically been used. But we don't have like a single list. The county doesn't maintain a single list of existing barge landing sites.
All right. So then, as these applications are submitted and demonstrated as historical, then we could add them to our list? Question mark.
If there were such a list, we could add them, but there is not a list. We could create a list, but I don't think that that's really, again, the county doesn't need to prove that the site is an existing historic. That's on the applicant, and for each application, they have to demonstrate that that the site is an existing and legally established temporary barge landing site.
All right. Then my final question is, so we keep talking about the applicant submitting an application. So what is this application? Is this an application for exemption or what?
No, it would be the proposal for the use. We don't actually get an application for this for an existing non-conforming use unless they were going to change it.
So what does the applicant submit to DCD to ask permission to temporarily use a barge landing?
Well, they wouldn't submit something. They would probably contact us ahead of time, or if we found out about a barge landing site, they would have to demonstrate to us that it was legal for them to use it. Otherwise, they'd be subject to code enforcement.
Right.
So there's not necessarily a review process ahead of time unless we're contacted by the person who wants to do this. But typically, if they were proposing this as part of kind of a larger proposal, where they were going to be doing some kind of development activity and barging in, barging in something for that construction, that would be kind of handled through a separate application for the other proposed use or development.
Okay.
This is Erica.
Before you get
Yes,
going
ma'am.
on the subject, should we not have a list? Question mark. I think we should. At least we have a foundational place to start. End of question.
This is Erica, Director of Community Development. We have, in terms of non-conforming or existing, there are lists that exist that of barge landing sites that we know of. None of those lists, though, have been adopted as a official barge landing site. So, for example, there are barge landing sites listed in our comprehensive plan owned by Public Works. There is a list from a 2004 inventory of existing barge landing and craft sites. When we look at, but none of those are an official list. What we would do is we would maybe use that. We might take a look at that and say, oh yeah, we have a record as part of the non-conforming use, but the applicant might also give us pictures and show what kind of things have been done on that to establish a use. It would be difficult for us to go through and create a list of all of the sites, and we certainly couldn't do it right now, but council could direct us to do something like that.
Okay. And I'm still confused how the applicant applies to do this or informs us that they're doing it so that we can ensure that this flow chart is actually working correctly if they don't have to submit anything to DCT before they land. So I'm a little confused about, I mean, this is a great flow chart, but there's no start to it because nothing is filed for that black box, is my understanding.
That is correct. Yeah. Without requiring a certificate of exemption for these landings, we don't receive an application.
So the only way this flow chart would work is if a citizen complains.
Correct. Or if they were proposing other development that the barge landing was part of, we could
Right.
kind of work through that. But if you're just landing a barge and that's it and no other development, we wouldn't require an application for that if it were an existing non-conforming.
Okay. Well, I mean,
So,
go ahead, Jamie.
no, go ahead, Bill, finish.
Well, I'm just trying to think this through as to how this is going to work on Waldron Island that gets everything pretty much by barge, of a wide variety of everything from an entire physical house that's barged in to, trash being barged off, old junk cars. Obviously, the most recent example is, they were doing required thinning of their forest, but couldn't get the logs off the island. So I mean, I think we need to think about this from a practical perspective, that there are islands in the county that require regular barge service that is dependent upon, weather and tides and everything else, as well as the size of the cargo that's being delivered. And, they pick their site based upon really the easiest way to get the material in or off the island. We need to recognize the need for transport, while also recognize the need for the lightness of the process. So I respect the desire to keep the process light, but yet if there's no application, then there is no process, because nothing gets started. So I think we really need to think this through for our variety of islands and needs out there, and we have enough experience with barging a material that we ought to be able to get this to handle the big complicated cases as well as the simpler regular use cases. So I'm done.
Could I ask, I just want to follow up with what Bill was saying, and Rick, it just seems like someone would be barging something into a temporary site, get a complaint, the whole project stops, and like Bill said, these things are dependent on tides and winds and weather. While we investigate it, it seems like if there was a start, we'd know if it was, there would be something that said it was historical anyway. I mean, and that Waldron logging is a really good example, I think, of that.
Is there not a Public Works document from the 90s that had a list of I want to call them usual and customary barge landings, but areas on some of the outer islands where people brought in material, building material, groceries, whatever, on a consistent basis? I remember at some point looking at something from Public Works, I think. Could that not be a foundational start to trying to isolate or locate where these things could happen, especially on the outer islands?
There are, as Erica mentioned, there are like kind of several lists, but there's not a single list. And so if you would like staff to put together a list, we could do that, and we could adopt that into the comp plan. But there isn't currently like a single list. It would take some doing to kind of compile that from various sources, one of which would be Public Works.
When you say a great deal of time, what does that mean? How big of a project is this?
Erica, do you have a comment on the resources that would take?
So this is Erica Shook. I don't think it's difficult for us to actually compile the lists. What I think will take time and be difficult will be the public process for all of the people that want to be included on the list, or think that certain sites should not be included on a list.
Right. And then listing the historical uses of the temporary sites.
Yes, at least one list that we have has actually lists, the 2004 list actually says what kind of often will tell you what the historic use was on the site. But yes, that's the other issue, once other people might want to be on the list, and then that we would have to evaluate, the nonconformity.
Right.
I would be interested in seeing a list. Council?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly if we're going to have this process, certainly if we're going to define temporary barge landings, certainly if we're going to ask applicants to submit justification for using a temporary barge landing, then it makes no sense not to actually have a list. And I agree, Erica, it will require some level of public process, because certainly neighbors and adjoining property owners and others would want to weigh in on whether it was or was not, a historical barge landing area. But I think we need to do it, especially for the outer islands, right? I mean, we're not really talking about the main islands with ferry service and with designated barge landings. This is really about the outer islands, I think, to the largest extent.
Mr. Stevens?
I didn't have anything. I agree.
Can I make a comment on this?
Is this Chad?
No,
this is Bill Potts. Is this open to the public for comment?
No, it is not. Not at this point. We will have a public comment section in a few minutes.
Okay. How do I go back to mute again?
I will take care of that.
Okay.
Jamie, I'm sorry. Please continue.
Yep.
I didn't have anything. I think we need some sort of start place for this.
All right, thank you.
And I think that might be the list.
Okay, Erica, I take that as direction from council that is it possible at some point to put together a timeline for how long you think it will take the creation of a list, and then we can talk about the public comment at that point?
Do you want it as part of this SMP update or as part of the list added to the comprehensive plan update?
My thoughts would be the comprehensive plan update, council.
I think that would be good.
Is there a way, and this might be not the right process, but is there a way for make reference to this is coming in the comprehensive plan, some kind of a placeholder or reference to once it's completed? Or is that not relevant?
I will have to come back to you. This is Erica. I will have to come back to you. I think I need to talk to the prosecuting attorney's office about the appropriate way to incorporate such a thing.
And I guess the only reason I'm saying that is that I don't want to impede the Shoreline, the SMP process any more than COVID has. So I wouldn't want to hold up this process just for this specific request, although I think it's important for us to have it in our comprehensive plan for the future. Council, is that
right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Erica. Just let us know what this could look like. Is that possible?
Yes, maybe not by the end of today.
Yeah, no.
No. At some point in the future, if you could let us know, that would be great. To your schedule.
Right. And then my other point is there needs to be something created to initiate this flow chart, whether it's a applicant notification, whether it's temporary barge use notification, whether it's, I don't know, some form that an applicant can submit to DCD that in effect executes this flow chart.
Okay.
So any other comments regarding this specific subject from council, or should we have Mr. Zach continue?
I'm done.
Mr. Zach, please continue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Next, Section 8 amends the forest practices section of the SMP to clarify that cutting of timber solely incidental to the preparation of land for another use is authorized by the SMP and is not considered a development under the Shoreline Management Act and doesn't require a shoreline exemption or a substantial development permit. Section 9 amends the residential development section to a simpler form than what was suggested in the previous draft ordinance. This section kind of clarifies that temporary fencing for habitat and natural system enhancement is allowed in critical area buffers. It clarifies that the critical area buffers must be met to achieve the no net loss standard. And furthermore, the amendments establish that a no net loss report may not be used to meet critical area requirements because the first step in the mitigation sequence, which is avoidance, that first step cannot be met. And Section 9 further amends. Sorry, was that a question?
No, sorry, I picked up a bottle.
Okay. Section 9 further amends 18.50.550 to clarify that residential appurtenances and accessory structures are not allowed in the aesthetic buffer except for pathways, stairways, ramps, and boathouses served by marine railways and other residential appurtenances. And the normal residential appurtenances and accessory structures less than 30 inches in height, and temporary fencing for habitat enhancement projects.
Adam, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
If a property is on a cliff or a high bank, it's still 200 feet from the high water mark up, correct?
Edge of bluff.
Yeah. That's the shoreline jurisdiction.
Okay. So question,
there's an edge of bluff also requirement though.
Correct. Yeah, the top of bank.
Top of bank. Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing I'm asking about is that if someone wanted to put a fence, like kind of a safety fence so no one went off the side of the cliff, how would that work on a high bank?
That's a good question. So the buffers would still apply, and they would be allowed. They can't place any kind of appurtenant structure waterward of the house, and a fence that's over 30 inches tall is an appurtenant structure. And so it wouldn't be able to be higher than 30 inches, the safety fence.
And again, to Bill's point there on it's been a long time since I've thought about the setbacks, the buffers. How does that work? Again, you just explained to me, but I'm being dense this morning. How does that work going straight up a cliff? Is it 200 feet going away from the high water mark, or is it 200 feet? Like, does that include the height of the cliff?
It would include the height of the cliff. It's like 200 feet as the crow flies. Yeah.
So let's say it's a 300-foot cliff. To Bill's comment, how does that mean on the edge of the embankment?
Well, it may be the top of the bank there if it were sheer and just straight down, but that wouldn't be. It's all of the distance is, as I said, as the crow flies. It's not necessarily including that vertical face.
This is Erica.
Oh, go ahead.
Could I just step back a little bit and I just want to step back on this requirement so we can talk about shoreline jurisdiction. Shoreline jurisdiction, the area that all of these regulations apply from, is measured from the ordinary high water mark, which if on the cliff property would probably be at the base of the cliff somewhere, and then as the crow flies, 200 feet. So it doesn't matter if the cliff is 300 feet tall, that doesn't really go into it because it's as the crow flies from. You draw lines straight up in the air from the ordinary high water mark, and then in the 300 feet landward or 200 feet landward is shoreline jurisdiction. So within that, we also have the critical area buffers, and they are a variety of them: a coastal geologic buffer, a tree protection zone, and water quality buffers are all measured from the ordinary high water mark, and they range anywhere from 35 feet for tree protection zone 1 to 75 to 100 feet for the water quality buffer, and then 110 feet for the tree protection zone. So that's the critical area buffer. The aesthetic buffer is measured from the top of bank. So in the cliff example, that would be measured from the top of the bank landward as the crow flies. And if there are screening trees, that aesthetic setback is 50 feet. If there are no screening trees to block view of the house, that setback is 100 feet. So what we've done with this section is we've simplified. Originally, the old code said that all your appurtenant structures had to be behind the house, essentially. But,
away from the water.
Right, away from the water. Yeah, sorry. Landward of the most seaward.
Thank you.
Right. So it's really confusing. And what we've done is we've just said we have a critical area buffer, we have an aesthetic buffer. You can't have those things in those buffers or with limitations. Then we're not punishing people who put their house further back than they have to. They can still have some stuff, in front of their house. And there's a less of an incentive to put your house like right up against the shoreline. And it simplifies for review for our staff. Our staff were finding it very difficult to figure out the most seaward, landward of the point of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. I apologize for taking us off course a little bit. I just was wondering that. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Let's see here. So Section 9 also removes the allowances for residential appurtenances not identified in the definition to be allowed by a shoreline conditional use permit. This was recommended by Ecology because after the other changes to the definition and regulations for normal residential appurtenances, the conditional use permit option was unnecessary. In other words, any development not described in the definition is just residential development and is already regulated by the rest of the Shoreline Master Program provisions. And then finally, this section kind of clarifies the lot width requirement does not apply to residential appurtenances and accessory structures that are less than 30 inches tall. So that'd be like a short deck or patio. Section 10 amends the transportation facilities and parking to clarify the permitting requirements for existing non-conforming temporary barge landing sites. So this is kind of the third amendment to the SMP that addresses this issue. The proposed amendment would not require a certificate of exemption for existing non-conforming temporary barge landing sites. And that's, again, consistent with sections 1 and 7.
Well, and Adam, so before you go on, sorry. So the fact that we have a designation as to a new temporary barge landing, how do we know it's a new temporary barge landing compared to a historic temporary barge landing unless there's a list and unless there's some kind of notification to DCD that someone wants to land a barge someplace in the islands?
Yeah, and I think that was the idea with what's the previous version of this, where it was just any temporary barge landing site required a certificate of exemption, because that was kind of the application process was applying for that certificate of exemption.
Right.
Now with the change here, we would need some way to demonstrate that, or the applicant, the person who wants to land the barge, would need to find a way to demonstrate that existing nonconformity.
And what was I'll call it motivation or reason for eliminating the certificate of exemption for a temporary barge landing?
That was the council wanted to make this change. This was a locally initiated change.
Because we wanted it to be easier to use temporary barge landings, or
right, to reduce the regulatory barriers for folks that want to do this at sites that have already been used in the past.
And how long does a certificate of exemption typically take?
I think it takes about 8 weeks. I don't know, Erica, do you know how long our certificates of exemption typically take? It
depends on what is proposed. I I would expect nothing less than 2 to 3 months, probably, depending on the exemption.
Okay, so this gets sort of caught up in the, I'll call it, normal permit queue.
Correct.
Okay, so there's not a separate path through DCD for one of these. It would follow the standard permit process, which again gets caught up into the backlog.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Now I understand the motivation. Thanks.
Any other questions on this one before we keep going?
Not for me.
Continue.
Okay. So moving on to section 11, this amends the 1850-600, which is the shoreline developments, uses, structures, and activities by designation. It's the shoreline use table. And the amendments here make institutional uses regulated similar to commercial uses, and adds a footnote number 7 for public pedestrian trails and single-family residence to clarify that the director of DCD is the local decision maker for substantial development permit applications for public pedestrian trails and residential accessory structures that don't meet that exemption threshold. The footnote is consistent with the changes that we made or that are proposed in section 4.
So, if I may, Adam, so for the public pedestrian trail, that typically would have to be in an existing public right-of-way, correct?
The public entity wanting to make the trail would have to have some kind of ownership stake in the property. Yes, or so it could be an easement or something like that too.
Well, yeah, okay, sorry, easement right-of-way, right. So this is only applicable, again, for public pedestrian trails to easements or right-of-ways that have already been designated.
Right, or it could be, I mean, if Public Works were to acquire the rights to land in the future, they could do it too, yeah. But it would have to meet the definition of the public pedestrian pathway, which is something that's open to the public and so on.
Right, so if Public Works, again, I'm just thinking through a scenario here, if they wanted to, let's say, put in a new right-of-way, right, which would be a new road, right? Their first step is to get the right-of-way. DCD is not involved in the right-of-way application process, are they?
Not necessarily, no. Not in acquiring the right-of-way. The Public Works is in charge of acquiring the right-of-way.
Right. So there's no land use review on right-of-ways. That's why you need a land use review on the, I'll call it construction, because there's been no previous land use review on the right-of-way. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Just the change in ownership is not a change in land use. Whereas once they start developing something, be it a trail or whatever, that's when the land use review or land use is being initiated at that point, or development is being initiated.
Well, I might disagree with you. I mean, issuing a right-of-way, right, sort of infers the fact that the use is going to change and therefore may need to have the land use review. Otherwise, the right-of-way is useless, right?
Right, but I think that would be Public Works, as they're deciding whether or not to acquire that right-of-way, would make that feasibility decision.
Right. Okay. Thoughts on that, Erica?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry. Thoughts on I'm asking this question about the public pedestrian trails, and that if Public Works obtains a new right-of-way, there is currently no land use review in that process, and that's why you require the review when they actually might want to do something in the right-of-way. And that seems a little bit after the fact, which is, why are we getting right-of-way rights if we are then denied doing whatever we want to do in it.
So this is Erica. I do believe if you were acquiring right-of-way that it would require council action
Right.
for the requirement. And council at that point could decide that they wanted to ask DCD or ask DCD's opinion or ask about land use for that particular right-of-way. In this instance, under the Shoreline Management Act, the permit requirements are triggered by development.
Right.
So that's what triggers it here.
But I would think changing a strip of land from, I don't know, whatever it was, to a public works right-of-way sort of changes its change its designation long before we actually do start doing any construction, just so that we know we have the right to do the construction. Otherwise, you might deny the construction later on down, and therefore we wasted the acquisition of the right-of-way.
I agree that whenever we purchase property for public purposes, that it should be thoroughly evaluated.
Okay.
Currently under our land use designations, right-of-ways and those types of things are just a yes use, or public trails and pedestrian trails, and in most land use designations. So a land use designation change is not required for a right-of-way. You can certainly have different regulatory schemes wherein you could require those types of things. We just aren't set up that way.
The question here is only in the shoreline, so it's
other critical areas, right?
Fair enough, but I mean, I think the question is, I would, to Erica's point, I hope we would research what we could or couldn't do. I don't think that these things are not allowed. It's just there's a long process to get a permit through. Correct, Erica?
So this particular section of the code it doesn't change the standards that are required for pedestrian trails. And what it does change is the decision maker. So you don't have to have a public hearing with the decision maker as the hearing examiner for these particular applications. But all of the rest of the criteria and the noticing and all of that stuff is still required.
Yeah, so this, there is a committee right now working on the old military road trail project, right? And they're out talking to private landowners, trying to get easements and right-of-ways so they can put a trail in, none of which has been going through DCD, and therefore they may make all these agreements, and then DCD comes around and says, oops, sorry, you can't run your trail through that for whatever land use reason, right? I'm making this up. Which sort of is sort of after the fact, right? Versus understanding that they have clearance and can actually put a trail there, and it's worth their effort to try to negotiate that. Same thing with a road. If we have a public road right now, and we now want to put a walking trail along the road in an existing right of way, it still requires potentially a substantial development permit if it's within the shoreline setback, even though the road has been there, right, and been being used. And yes, it's an ancillary use, but compared to traffic going on the road, a walking trail seems to be pretty minor. Those are the two scenarios.
This section is that it doesn't have to go through the same issues, right? I mean, for this point, that's exactly the point of this, is that we still have to do all the mitigation and all the work that you need to do to preserve critical areas and shoreline around this public trail. It's just the decision is going to be made and that the county is held accountable to DCD for doing the proper work.
Correct, yeah. And again, as Mr. Hughes pointed out, the new footnote number 7 in this section is to kind of streamline that process and make it easier for Public Works to acquire those, or whoever's developing public pedestrian pathways to get the substantial development permit.
And Adam, please correct me if I'm wrong, but public pathways are allowed outright anywhere as long as you follow the mitigation requirements set for the land use or for a critical area of the shoreline.
Correct. Yeah. I think that they're
paths are allowed. So
right. They may require a substantial development permit in the shoreline, but this is saying that if they do require that, DCD is now the decision maker on that, rather than going to the hearing examiner. So it reduces some of that process.
But they're still required to do the same kind of protection, environmental protection, as you would throughout any process. Or
correct. It would still be required to meet the no net loss requirements and those protections there. It's just right. Instead of the hearing examiner issuing the decision, the director of DCD makes the decision.
And Bill, sorry I jumped in. Is there anything else on that?
Nope.
Jamie, any thoughts?
Well, a perfect example is the money we got on the complete streets to put in a walking pathway along Fisherman Bay Road on Lopez between the marina and the village. You know, because it can only go so far right now until we run into the shoreline, you know, and shoreline regulations, and currently would have to go through the hearing examiner to put a 6-foot trail in the right of way. So, I mean, this does streamline that a lot more on something. I mean, the permitting will probably cost more than the entire trail. Current regulations. So, yes, as you were talking about, Mr. Chair, is that this streamlines the permitting, but you still have to adhere to the rules of development rules.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from council, or is it all right to have Mr. Zach continue?
Proceed.
Zach.
Okay, we're closing in on it here. So section 12 amends the pre-application meeting requirements and permit exemptions to clarify that we replaced date of filing with date of receipt for shoreline permits sent to ecology. And this is to comply with the changes to state law. And then a new subsection H3 authorizes the DCD director to be the decision maker on applications for public pedestrian trails and residential accessory structures that do not meet that exemption threshold. Again, this is kind of implementing that change in footnote 7 from the last slide. And finally, section 13 amends 15.12.030 to include one of the legislature's options for defining floodway as set forth in the criteria in the Shoreline Management Act. And this change will make the SMP consistent with the changes in state law. Looking ahead at the tentative schedule as we move forward, so we have our joint public hearing with ecology today, and then in the next month and a half, as the county, as we close in on our proposed ordinance, we'll put together a submittal to ecology with our response to comments and get their kind of initial completeness review. And then the county can adopt the SMP, and then ecology issues their final decision after that. So that'll be in the next couple of months. The staff reports, public comments, and notices are published on the project website. The public can sign up to get notices about this project through the website. Please send any comments to smpcomments@sanjuanco.com. And then if there are any additional questions, I can answer them now.
Erica, I'm sorry, may I ask a question?
Oh, of course.
Erica sent out a staff report yesterday afternoon with an addition. Are we going to discuss that?
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask the process question. I haven't read that that section into the record. So to Mr. Stevens' question, Adam, should I read that into the record, or would you read that into the record?
I think what we want to do process-wise is Erica can kind of explain the issue a little bit, and then if you decide to make the recommended motion, that would get it into the record. Erica can take it over from here for that issue.
Mr. Stevens, thank you for bringing that forward. I apologize for interjecting.
No, that's fine.
This is Erica Shook, Director of Community Development, and I believe Adam's going to actually put my memo that I sent out yesterday up on the screen, so you'll be able to see it, and the general public will be able to see it. This is a proposed amendment, and it's related to some series of applications we've been receiving that appear to be showing us, I guess, a loophole or unintended consequence to some of our regulations. And this, so I'm proposing a change to San Juan County Code Section 18.50.550, which is related.
Lost.
From an archaeology perspective.
Erica,
yes?
I'm sorry, you just phased out for about a minute.
Oh no. Uh-oh. Hope my headset is okay. Just let me know if it doesn't continue. San Juan County shorelines are highly sensitive from an archaeological perspective, and there have been situations in the past where Native American nations have desired that archaeological resources or sites be protected from erosion with shoreline stabilization measures. In our SMP in 18.50.100D, we added a provision that would allow Native American tribes to propose or use shoreline stabilization to protect archaeological sites. What we didn't put into the regulations is something that said that it's supposed to be an application by the affected Native American tribe. I'm sure that that was the intent. And in actual practice, we've had at least 3 private property owners use this section to justify hard shoreline stabilization or bulkheading projects that are not necessary to protect a single-family residence and that don't meet other shoreline stabilization requirements. Since there are so many archaeological sites in the shorelines in San Juan County, without additional clarification, we think that this would result in frequent, unnecessary, and harmful stabilization of San Juan County shorelines. So we are proposing that we clarify this section to basically state that the permit application for the stabilization measure must be submitted by the affected Native American tribe. To clarify that it isn't just to be used to protect all archaeological sites. Each of the tribes has a different way of addressing archaeological sites and how they would like those to either be subject to erosion or not subject to erosion. And in the text here, I have also deleted the part that says with a shoreline substantial development permit. The determination of whether it's a substantial development permit is already addressed elsewhere in the code, and what this does is create additional confusion.
Right.
So that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I understand where you're trying to go with this, and I think it's a good idea, Erica. I'm just wondering on this, if the permit application, I mean, if whoever's doing the application is probably paying for this, you know, maybe they want it stabilized, but it's on somebody else's property that's doing that. How does that work?
If there was a archaeological site that was on private property and the tribes felt strongly that it should be protected, they could approach the property owner, and they could make application with a letter of authority or letter of authority from the property owner.
Okay. And do we need some sort of protocol for notifying tribes?
with any type of development that's within or in proximity to an area that's known to have archaeological resources, we route all of those applications to the tribes and require archaeological reports. In this instance, we would probably want to route this language to the tribes just as part of your SMP process.
Okay. And on that, I'm just wondering, excuse me, I'm wondering if you should have in parentheses an S on tribes, because some of these sites are shared sites.
That is probably, that's an excellent suggestion. We can, you'd have to add that to the motion.
Okay.
Okay.
Darn it. Jamie, you stole my comment.
Once in a while, I pick up the grammar, Bill.
Way to go. My other question along those same lines was, you talked about if the tribe wanted to do it. What if the private landowner wants the tribe to do it?
That would be up to the affected tribe.
Right, and the landowner to initiate it somehow.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Is that it, question-wise?
Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, it seems to make sense, and I agree with the interpretation of the original intent. And then yeah, it should be Native American tribes, or tribe with S in parentheses maybe, i.e. one or more.
Mr. Stevens, are you okay with this?
Yep.
From the process side, what I'd like to do, I want to take a 15-minute break at this point before we go into the public hearing. If it's all right, I'd like to have two things in the public hearing. The first thing we would do is address this amendment after we take public comment, and then discuss the rest of the document as it's read. So this is included in the reading in of the hearing. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So if it's all right, we will take a 12-minute break and come back at 10:30. Thank you very much.